The For Real News is sponsored by assholes like you, so pay up, motherfucker. Let me introduce you to Kshama Sawant. If you're from the Seattle area, you might know her name. On the national level, she's not very well known, apart from people like me that go researching these kinds of things. She is one of the, I believe she's the only elected official from the Socialist alternative political organization. And she's been a Seattle City Council member since 2014. She's a former software engineer. She was born in Pune in India, which is one of the more prestigious areas of the country where there's more and more high-tech firms opening up. I believe she got a, well, let's go look through her education. She got a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science in 1994 at the University of Mumbai. And her husband is a software engineer at the university or at Microsoft. And they've since become divorced, and she's been remarried. So this woman is pretty much the, well, not the guy in front of you, but the woman in the previous frame was pretty much the face of socialism in Seattle since her election to the city council, and she's been endorsed by several Democrats. She's endorsed by Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine, which is a group that they've done videos glorifying the Shining Path terrorist group from Peru. They are pretty much hardcore Marxists. And Sawant pretty much, she follows that type of line in every single issue. She's very hardcore left-wing on foreign policy. And then she's been involved in asking for a $15 minimum wage, which I believe they got up to $13. I'm not quite sure. But we're talking now. We'll address some of the issues of minimum wage as time permits. But she's pushing a new idea, and I'd like you to pay attention to some key points there.
Welcome to the Real News. I'm Jess Lenore in Baltimore. Tax the rich. That was the rallying cry as the Seattle City Council on Monday unanimously passed an income tax for its wealthiest residents. Critics are vowing a legal challenge, but supporters like our next guest say the 2.25% tax on those earning more than $250,000 or households earning more than $500,000 will annually raise about $140 million every year, help fund social services, and perhaps lead to lowering of some of Seattle's other high taxes, which are considered some of the most aggressive in the country. Well, now joining us to discuss this is the bill's co-sponsor, Kshama Sawant, first socialist elected to Seattle's City Council in over a century. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
One of the reasons I keep kind of lampooning their videos, they do a few good reports. But even when they do a good news story, I've noticed that the Real News Network presenters always look like they're members of a cult or something. Like they're just on camera so that they can get away from being tortured in a basement. I mean, they have zero charisma, and that kind of makes it hard for me to pay attention. But well, some of the things they say, they get my attention right back.
So I wanted to first get your response to critics who say, this is unconstitutional and it's illegal in the state of Washington because no income tax is allowed in Washington. Give us your response to that.
First of all, Jessel, if you don't mind, I just wanted to give a certain background context for your viewers about what this actually means. I mean, we are in an era of Donald Trump, a racist, misogynist bigot who's in the White House, who's
Thanks for answering the question.
Vowed a war against workers and labor unions, and is a billionaire himself, and has an administration that is wealthier than any other U.S. presidential administration in history. And at that same moment, we're seeing incredible victories being won by social movements organized by workers and young people. So, for example, 15 Now, the movement that we started in Seattle, that socialist alternative started in Seattle, has now gone nationwide. And just less than a week ago, 15 Now Minnesota just won a landmark victory with winning $15 an hour for Minneapolis workers. This is the first Midwestern state to win $15 an hour. And yesterday in Seattle, as you said, Jessel, we just won a tax on Seattle's rich. And this was won because of the movement of working people, as I said, and led by socialists and other activists. And if you look at the state of Washington, where Seattle is,
led by people who are unemployed who have the time to do it.
Washington has the most regressive tax system in the entire nation. And for decades, a ferocious, punishing burden of tax revenue has been put on the shoulders of the poorest people, of lower income people, of middle class households, while the richest corporations like Boeing and Microsoft make out like bandits, and not to mention the billionaire and millionaire super wealthy households. And so this tax is extremely important.
Making out like bandits is kind of the point when you're trying to introduce the most cutting-edge technology in the world.
And the state law at this moment is at best ambiguous about it. And we know there will be a lawsuit by Republicans, by the right wing, by the billionaire class. But the point is, throughout history, we've seen that when you have unjust laws, you can't, if you have a different vision of society, you can't just sit back and say, well, we have an unjust law, what can you do? No. The example of abortion rights, civil rights, marriage equality, all of these examples show that when grassroots activists take to the street, build fighting movements in their cities and in their states, the Supreme Court will follow. So we want to challenge this in the court.
So what she's basically saying is that democracy doesn't mean dick, because most of the examples put forth here actually violated the democratic desires of voters. The civil rights movement, you know, whether you believe it in or not, I happen to believe in, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation and all these other things, the Voting Rights Act and all that. I do believe in them, but if you really think about it, in the states that they were applied, they were not democratically voted upon. It kind of took federal coercion to enforce them. So, you know, that may be a case of positive enforcement. However, if you look at some of her other examples, like the marriage equality movement, marriage equality did not achieve any sort of traction through the voters. It was all through the courts. The voters voted it down nearly in every state. I think the only state that didn't vote it down was Minnesota. Every other state was voting by massive margins against gay marriage. So, you know, basically she's saying, we will change society for you, and you're going to like it, or we'll fuck you over in the court.
So critics say this is going to drive away the wealthy from Seattle. I wanted to play a clip of Fox Business News' Stuart Varney. He had some choice words for the bill. Let's give it a listen.
Can we be clear? This tax is punitive. It is punishment for success, and it won't work. Remember, Maryland imposed a millionaire's tax some years ago. That didn't work. The rich simply moved. Remember also that Seattle imposed a much bigger, higher minimum wage. That led to employees working fewer hours and taking home less pay. The poor are no better off. In fact, they lose ground. Youth unemployment goes through the roof. Businesses move and hire fewer people, and the rich move to Texas or Florida.
So that's Fox Business News. That is, you know, the outlet for the right-wing elite. They're saying it's not going to work. Give us your response.
Well, it's not surprising that the right wing and the business class and wealthy people have this completely false, as far as I'm concerned, false narrative of capitalism. He says this is going to be punitive. No, actually, what we have right now, the status quo under capitalism, is that working people, young people, the poor, and the middle class are punished every single day, and they are the ones that are responsible for the success, for productivity, for the creation of...
She doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about. And we'll see exactly where who will prevail in terms of the real data? Is it Varney from Fox, or is it this woman who's staring into the camera acting like she's about to assault it? Okay, in the recent, this is actually from a Nevada Valley, the Pahrump Valley Times, but it's in Nevada, and they run it down. It says, raise the minimum wage, reduce worker pay. That's not what the left promised, but that's what's happening in Seattle, which is phasing in a $15 an hour minimum wage. What's happening in the Pacific Northwest is a clear warning to Nevada politicians who want to hike our minimum wage. Recently, researchers from the University of Washington found that Seattle's increase in the minimum wage from $11 an hour to $13 an hour reduced hours worked by low-wage employees by 9%, while hiking pay just 3%. For low-wage workers, that represented a $125 a month reduction in pay. Low-wage employment dropped by 6.8%, with more than 5,000 jobs eliminated. This study is forcing some liberals to acknowledge the possibility that quick hikes in the minimum wage can hurt the people they're intended to help. And then they list some Washington Post blog posts. I don't really care about the Washington Post, so as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter. Adding to the difficulty intellectually honest liberal leftists will have in dismissing the study is the praise heaped on the first study produced by this UW research team. Last year, the researchers looked at the impacts of raising Seattle's minimum wage from $9.50 to $11 an hour. They found gains in hourly pay were mostly offset by a decline in hours worked and a small reduction in overall employment. Those findings elated liberals. Jared Bernstein, a former chief economist to Vice President Joe Biden, trumpeted in 2016 that Seattle's high minimum wage was simply having its intended effect. So let's look at that. Let's look at that little snippet. So it says here, so far the Seattle minimum wage increase is doing what it's supposed to do, by Jared Bernstein, a former chief economist to Vice President Biden, and a senior fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And he says, what happens when a study shows that a minimum wage increase is simply having its intended effect? When it's found to raise the pay of low-wage workers without causing much in the way of job displacements that critics rail about? Unfortunately, one thing that apparently happens is the findings get misinterpreted. So he starts saying, you know, that it doesn't decrease pay. It doesn't, like the workers do end up benefiting from it. Attacks from knee-jerk opponents of the minimum wage, who in some cases are paid by the low-wage employer and lobby to shoot at anything that moves, regardless of the evidence, were expected and are easily dismissed. So this is based on the same researchers that concluded this week that the study did, in fact, negatively impact workers in the Puget Sound area. So then the Nevada paper goes on to reveal that now that the findings of the study are not so rosy about the minimum wage hike, the study researchers got fired. Let's take a look at that. So it says, when a University of Washington study came out, this is from Fox News, not from InfoWars, came out this week showing Seattle's minimum wage has cost 5,000 jobs and is hurting low-income workers, city leaders attacked the messenger, a team of respected economists at Washington's premier public university. So this was a University of Washington group that conducted the study, and they got fired for showing that according to their method, the city lost 5,000 jobs. It says the researchers led by Joseph Victor were hired by the city in 2014 to study the effects of Seattle's $15 wage experiment. The contract called for 5 years of research. City officials stopped funding the UW team when they didn't like the results. So now it's 2017. They're starting to see some undesirable effects, and they got fired. And then it says, the moment we saw it was based on flawed methodology and was going to be unreliable. The Victor study no longer speaks for City Hall, said Seattle City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant. Sawant, a former economics professor at Seattle Central Community College who ran for office as a socialist, accused the UW team of ideologically editorializing. Gee, I wonder where they got that behavior from. She and Mayor Ed Murray then contacted Michael Reich, an economics professor at the University of California at Berkeley. Reich is currently co-chair of the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment. Before earning his PhD in economics from Harvard, Reich was a founding member of the Union for Radical Political Economics, a group seeking a human-centered radical alternative to capitalism, according to its website. So she goes from accusing a research team composed of people in her state, Washington State, at her flagship university, and she gets them, or I guess the entire city council. You can't blame it all on Kshama Sawant, even though she has that death stare. But you know, they fire this research team claiming that they're biased, and then they hire this group of guys that are just as biased. Well, on the other side, though, or probably more so. Because, honestly, if the same research group was reporting positive data for the previous cycle, I think it was for 2016, and the city council was fine with it, then why didn't they review the methodology then? Well, the reason is because at the time, the data didn't look so bad. So let's listen a little more to Kshama Sawant. Maybe we'll bring up the people that she's hired to do this study. So this is Michael Reich from University of California, Berkeley. And here are his thoughts on the minimum wage and whether raising it is good for workers or bad for workers.
I've been around a while, around the block a few times, so I've published quite a few books on labor economics, including on racial inequality. I helped start the whole area of segmented labor markets back, before anyone watching this was born. And most recently, I've been working on minimum wages and also living wages in the United States. But what everybody focuses on is whether employment will fall as a result of raising the wage, which is the intuitive answer. Certainly, any of our introductory economics students are taught that demand curve slopes downwards. When you raise the wages, there's going to be fewer people that employers want to hire. And then the question is that a good trade-off or not? And we find in the U.S., as has been found in the UK, that indeed the minimum wage has not reduced employment. And that's a surprising finding. I've done this most recently by comparing.
Okay, so you see his position there, and I mean, I'm not saying that he can't have his position and his data and his methodology, and I'll put a link to the video if you want to watch it. You know, I have no problem with people watching somebody else's views that aren't my own, but that's not the point here. I mean, it's all fine and dandy to hire a professor that has, even if they do have a bias, but you can't pretend that having hired a previous group to conduct a study, and then you don't get the results that you want, then you fire them, and you hire somebody that will probably skew the data in your favor. That's not fair to the voters or for the businesses that are in the area that is in question, or I guess the municipality, the city of Seattle. What you're doing there is you're basically saying to them, look, I mean, for the past few years, we were giving you good news. Now we've gotten bad news. So we're just going to report good news. We're going to find somebody that will give us the news that we want. And I think it's absurdly dishonest for her to do that. At least what she could do is, instead of firing the old researchers, she could what she could have done basically was to request a study in parallel. And there would be hearings on which study was more accurate and which one wasn't. And then the voters would be able to judge the other panelists, the business owners, Instead, what you're really getting is this basic filtering of information by these elected officials, which I think is, I mean, I hope I never get to the point where I do that to people. At that point, I'd probably say, you know what, I'm not really going to publish anything anymore. I'm just going to not comment or whatever, because I think a lot of people are kind of getting wise to the fact that, leaders just lie to them. So let's go back to Sawant's video.
Resulted in economic destruction, or that tax on wealthy people will somehow result in all kinds of negative consequences. As a matter of fact, all the evidence in economic studies, statistical evidence, shows that minimum wage increases end up in a good, lifting workers out of poverty, and that a tax on millionaires throughout history and throughout geographically throughout the world has been a social democratic measure under capitalism, through which we can fund the basic needs, the basic necessities of the millions of working people who go to work every day and do not take home the lion's share of the wealth in our system.
So she said that studies prove that, but here you had a study that said otherwise, and you just fired the people. And instead, you can see she's getting agitated. This is the way she talks all the time. She gets all agitated and emotional about it. I think that this might have been the reason why, well, I'm not going to get into that, but I think this might be one of the reasons that she kind of rubbed somebody the wrong way, and I'll leave it at that. But she is basically trying to argue on authority of studies that don't have to do with the city of Seattle. I mean, there could be local reasons why it hasn't been working. It could just be that, they had to adjust something, but instead she fired this group of panelists. And now she's calling for this tax on the rich. And she's acting as if capital flight is not a major problem. I'll be honest with you. I think if you want to take the United Kingdom as an example, capital flight really is a problem. And Phil Collins, for example, has been notorious for years for just keeping his money abroad and, coming back to England, maybe for like not even like having a permanent address there. I mean, when you get the money, let's not pretend that it's a good thing, but just being selfish or whatever. But once you get into real money, the first thing that you try to do is you stow as much of it away so people can't get to it and take it back away from you.
But I will make one more statement, Jessel. As a socialist, the reality is this. This is a bitter reality, but it is absolutely necessary for us as social movements to confront. The truth is that even though minimum wage increases, taxes on the rich, and such reforms will not have any direct negative impact on the economy, the reality is that the capitalist class, the bosses, those who have an interest in keeping this exploitative and oppressive system alive, they will find other ways of undercutting our successes. So it is not going to be enough simply to fight for reforms like minimum wage increases or like taxing the rich. In fact, we have to learn the lesson from not only from the past, but also what's happening in other countries. I mean, I'll give you an example. The National Health Service in Britain has been a brilliant example of publicly funded, affordable, quality healthcare, but by grossly underfunding it decade after decade, both by Tories and by the Blairite Labour politicians, the NHS right now is a shell of what it could be. And so
listen to this bullshit that she's spewing. She's using the NHS, which is a system which is, somewhat popular in the United Kingdom, but it's everybody's complaining that it's falling apart over there. And the Charlie Gard case, which I've tried not to exploit for emotional purposes, is gaining the attention of people that you could actually have people harmed by this type of system. What she's trying to say here is that it's not enough to raise the minimum wage. It's not enough to do this tax on the rich. Once you do that, and there might be adverse effects, then you have to go even further. And she's citing the example of the United Kingdom as a place where these progressive policies have kind of run their course, and you have not just the NHS. She should also talk about the awful public housing that she has there. Well, somebody has to maintain that, and if the government is not getting enough receipts in taxes to maintain that government property and government institution and fund those workers, then you are going to have a disaster, in the case of the healthcare system, a humanitarian disaster. In the case of housing system, it's also a humanitarian disaster. And they're basically complaining that these gigantic, bureaucracies and infrastructures that they build, they're complaining that at some point the rich people and the working people, they won't say it's the working people, but let's talk about the middle class. Let's talk about business owners. Let's talk about successful people. They're not going to try to pay for more of that, and things can happen. The worldwide economic downturn of the late 2000s was one of the reasons for the NHS having to deal with this lack of funds, and there were bank bailouts. By the way, the British government had to bail out the Icelandic government, which is a social democratic country. They had to bail them out. They'd overdrawn all their funds. They were sinking in debt up to their ears. They had to bail out their own banks, like the Royal Bank of Scotland. So what Sawant is doing here is she's engaging in this real raw attack on capitalism, not realizing that a lot of these elements like subprime loans and the housing industry and public housing, public health care, they are all interventions by the government into the private sector. And she can say that for all she cares, she could say till the end of time that those are the things that they belong to the people and that we have to safeguard them. What she can't talk about is how you're supposed to fund them in the long term. And she kind of reveals her hand here. I mean, she shows that behind this, spunky demeanor is kind of a nasty type of attitude towards people that are successful, and she's truly all the radical that people are complaining about her for.
Becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You if you're the boss, you underfund the program and you say, it doesn't work, so it needs to be taken back. Same with minimum wage increases, taxes on the rich, and any other reform. They will find, the capitalist class, the ruling class will find every other avenue to undercut the reforms that we do win. That is why my appeal to everybody who's watching this is not only should we first of all get involved in fighting movements to win these reforms, let's win a $15 minimum wage federally, let's win a tax on the rich and tax on big corporations to fund affordable and make free public education, affordable Medicare for all, and all of those gains. But let's go beyond that and fight for a different kind of system than capitalism, because as long as the edifice of capitalism remains intact, we will be forced to continue fighting for the same reforms over and over again.
She's saying the business owners, go fuck yourself. Okay, who is like still in the dark as to what her real intention is? This is a communist. Nobody gives a fuck if you call your movement democratic socialist or socialist alternative or whatever. It is meaningless. We're talking about somebody who has said here up front, if we do not get the results we want, we will hire the people to tailor the results to what we need. And if those people that have the resources are reluctant to give them over because the results that we're giving them are bad for them or bad for the worker, but we're not going to admit it, then we're going to take those resources away and we're going to replace the capitalist system with something else, which is communism, and or something else of the socialist nature. It doesn't matter. To be honest with you, I've already read through and analyzed a number of these democratic socialist publications, and they don't really say anywhere how they're going to collect these resources without, just forcing people to give them over. That's really deception. That's the way of the communist coercion system, and I propose otherwise. Okay, and the real news, they're always trying to make it seem like everybody else is unfair besides them. They try to make it seem like the corporate media is blowing Venezuela out of proportion or whatever. The fact is that you can see that the streets of Seattle, as flawed as they may be, and I'm not from Seattle, I've never been there. I've always lived in the Midwest. But the streets of Seattle are not nearly as bad as the streets of Venezuela, and they're not as bad as the streets of Romania in 1989, or the streets of China in 1989, or any of those countries. The peoples in these countries where those progressive policies are really enacted, and this class warfare rhetoric is brought to life, they become miserable. And that's kind of the message that I want to end on. So this is my message for today. This is Ramon with Bold Like a Leopard, and money can't buy happiness. That's the for real news. But if you have a lot of money and you're a major asshole and you're miserable, you're still way far ahead of some other dick who has no money and is also miserable. So that might at least bump up your spirits a little. And have a great day. It's coming up on Thursday. Let me know what you think. Do you believe that the minimum wage can be raised without harming local businesses and employees? Or do you believe, like me, that the minimum wage is actually a mechanism that is price fixing the labor market and eventually actually hurts the people it's meant to help?